The alien research vessel Veilvar hovered silently above the desolate remains of what was once a thriving human city. Towering buildings, now skeletal ruins, jutted into the gray sky like the broken fingers of a forgotten civilization. Dr. Zyron, a highly regarded scientist among the Zelvari, stood with his arms crossed, his mandibles twitching in amusement. So this was humanity's great empire, he mused, his voice laced with condescension. Pathetic. How fragile they must have been to let their world crumble like this. Beside him, his fellow researchers, Dr. Lyre and Scholar Oren, nodded in agreement, their expressions marked with barely concealed disdain. The Zelvari prided themselves on their advanced knowledge, their unbroken civilization that had lasted millennia without collapse. To them, the idea that humans had once believed themselves powerful was laughable. The ruins below were nothing more than a testament to their inevitable failure. They were primitive, Lyre added, flicking through old human records on his holographic display. Obsessed with war. Driven by emotion rather than logic. It's no wonder their civilization fell apart. The team descended, their sleek exploration pods touching down in what was once a grand city square. Cracked pavement stretched beneath their feet as they walked through the wreckage, their scanning devices humming softly. Shattered glass crunched underfoot, and rusted street signs swayed in the cold breeze. Oren chuckled as he ran his claws along the surface of a faded metal plaque. They called this a shopping mall. A structure dedicated to nothing but the exchange of meaningless goods. Typical of a species ruled by greed. Zyron smirked, but as he prepared to make another remark, something strange caught his attention. A flicker, just barely noticeable, inside one of the buildings. He paused, his ridged brow furrowing. What was that? The others turned, following his gaze. The building in question was a massive structure, its windows shattered, its walls covered in vines. Whatever it had once been, a place of gathering, perhaps, it now stood as a hollow shell of the past. Your eyes are playing tricks on you, Lyre scoffed, adjusting his scanner. Nothing here could still be operational after so long. Zyron wasn't convinced. He stepped closer, his elongated fingers trailing over the rusted doorframe. His scanner showed no energy signatures, no signs of life, yet something felt off. A strange pressure in the air, a sensation he couldn't quite explain. Then, without warning, the lights inside the building flickered on. Harsh, artificial white light flooded the space beyond the shattered windows. Machines, long thought dead, hummed to life. A low, rhythmic beeping echoed from within, like a heartbeat rising from the grave. The Zelvari scientists froze. That's impossible, Oren whispered, his voice barely above a breath. There's no power source left on this planet. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. The ruins they had so easily dismissed were no longer lifeless. Someone, was still here. A screen inside the building flickered, static giving way to an old, distorted message. The figures on the screen were human, their faces blurred with age, their voices lost to time. But as the static cleared, one phrase came through, crisp and unmistakable. You shouldn't have come here. Zyron's chest tightened. The arrogance in his eyes flickered with something new, something he hadn't felt in years. Unease. The lights pulsed again, brighter this time, casting long, shifting shadows across the ruins. A distant sound, metal scraping against concrete, echoed from the depths of the city. And then, from somewhere beyond the crumbling walls, a door slammed shut. The Zelvari scientists were no longer alone. Oren swallowed hard, his mandibles clicking together as he took a cautious step back. The air inside the ruined city felt heavier now, thick with something unseen yet undeniable. Lyre's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his scanner, but the device still showed nothing. No power grid. No active systems. No life. And yet, the lights burned brightly, humming with a quiet energy that shouldn't exist. This is a malfunction, Lyre muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Some ancient backup system triggered by our presence. Nothing more. Zyron wasn't so sure. His sharp gaze flicked toward the distant buildings, their shattered windows glinting under the artificial glow. The streets, once silent, now carried the faintest echo of something moving, soft, deliberate, just at the edge of hearing. "Explain the message, then," Zyron said, his voice steady but low. "You shouldn't have come here. That's not random. That's a warning." Oren exhaled sharply, his clawed fingers tightening around his data pad. A pre-recorded transmission. Probably one of their last desperate attempts before their collapse. "Or something else," Zyron murmured, stepping closer to the illuminated building. A rusted sign above the entrance, half buried in vines, barely held onto its last faded letters, "Research Facility." Lyre narrowed his eyes. "A scientific installation? Here?" Zyron glanced at him. "You assumed this was just another city full of human excess. But it seems they had something more valuable here." The entrance doors hung open, one of them swaying slightly as if nudged by an unseen hand. Beyond it, the light pulsed in slow, steady waves, almost like breathing. "We should leave," Oren said, his voice unusually quiet. "We came to study ruins, not." A sudden sound cut through the air. A metallic clang, sharp and deliberate, echoed from within the building. It wasn't random. It wasn't wind or settling debris. It was something moving. Oren stiffened. Lyre cursed under his breath. Zyron stepped forward. The others turned to him, their expressions unreadable. "We're scientists," he said, his tone firm. "We don't turn away from the unknown." The words felt brave, but as he crossed the threshold, stepping into the facility's dimly lit corridor, even Zyron couldn't shake the growing feeling that they had made a mistake. The interior of the building was eerily intact. Dust hung thick in the air, swirling in the artificial light. Old terminals lined the walls, their cracked screens dark, except for one. At the far end of the hallway, a single monitor flickered, its glow casting strange shadows across the floor. The Zelvari moved cautiously, their footfalls muffled by the thick layer of dust. Lyre kept scanning, frustration flickering across his face as his device continued to report nothing unusual. No power. No transmissions. No motion. But they could all feel it. The presence of something unseen. Zyron reached the active monitor first, his elongated fingers hovering over the faded controls. The screen was filled with scrolling text, lines of old human data logs, fragmented and corrupted with age. But one section was still clear. Project Revenant, status unknown. A chill ran down Zyron's spine. Project Revenant, he murmured, eyes narrowing. That doesn't sound like simple research. Oren leaned closer, his eyes scanning the text. This facility wasn't for civilian use, he realized. This was military. Lyre exhaled sharply. That explains why it's still operational. Human military installations were built to withstand centuries. But why reactivate now? Before Zyron could answer, the lights flickered again. Not just in the hallway, throughout the entire facility. A low hum filled the air, and then, one by one, the dark monitors around them flared to life. Lines of corrupted text raced across the screens. Symbols and numbers in an ancient human code flashed in erratic bursts. A voice, garbled and broken, whispered from unseen speakers. Remained, "We were wrong, it doesn't sleep." The words sent a jolt through Zyron's chest. He turned sharply, scanning the room, but nothing had changed, except for one thing. The dust beneath their feet. It had been undisturbed when they entered. But now, fresh tracks cut through the thick layer of dirt. Not theirs. Zyron's throat tightened. "We need to move." Oren hesitated. "Move where?" But Zyron didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the far end of the hallway, where a set of reinforced doors stood partially open. Beyond them, the glow of emergency lighting bathed the walls in an unnatural red hue. Something waited beyond those doors. And whatever it wasn't human. Zyron turned to the others. This facility didn't just reactivate. Something turned it back on. Liar VA's skin darkened in alarm. You think something's still alive here? Oren shook his head. Impossible. If humans had any survivors, they would have been found centuries ago. A new sound broke through the air. Slow, dragging footsteps. Not mechanical. Not the erratic shuffle of settling debris. Deliberate. Heavy. Coming from the darkness ahead. The Zelvari fell silent, every instinct screaming at them to run. But then, from the far side of the facility, something else responded. A distant, distorted voice. Not a recording. Not a transmission. A voice that had been waiting in the dark. Who's there? Zyron's breath caught in his throat. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the facility doors groaned, and a rush of cold air swept through the hall. The lights above them surged, then cut out. For a long, suffocating moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, in the pitch black, something moved. The darkness pressed in around them like a living thing, thick and suffocating. Zyron's breath came shallow and quick as he strained his eyes, trying to make out any shape in the black void that surrounded them. His fingers tightened around his scanner, but the device was useless. The readings still showed nothing. No movement. No energy signatures. Nothing at all. But they had all heard it. That voice. That question. Who's there? Liar VA cursed under his breath, his usual arrogance replaced by something much closer to fear. Oren shifted uneasily, his posture tense, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. But Zyron forced himself to stay still. If something, or someone, had spoken, it meant they weren't alone. And if they weren't alone, they had to understand what they were dealing with. A faint glow pulsed to life at the end of the corridor. The emergency lights flickered back on, casting long, jagged shadows that stretched along the walls like reaching fingers. The heavy doors ahead of them, the ones leading deeper into the facility, groaned as if something had pushed against them. And then they opened. A gust of stale, freezing air swept through the hallway, carrying with it the faint scent of rust and decay. Beyond the doors lay a vast, open chamber filled with strange machinery, consoles covered in thick layers of dust, and cables hanging from the ceiling like vines in a forgotten jungle. The walls bore the faded remnants of human symbols, warnings, instructions, perhaps even names of those who had once worked here. At the center of the room, something stirred. Zyron's hand hovered near his holstered plasma tool, not a weapon, but a standard-issue cutter meant for research teams. Right now, it was the only thing he had that could possibly serve as protection. He took a cautious step forward, eyes fixed on the shadowy figure ahead. It didn't move like a machine. It wasn't stiff or methodical. Instead, it swayed slightly, as if unsure of its own weight, shifting with an unnatural fluidity. And then, with agonizing slowness, it turned toward them. A figure stood in the dim light, wrapped in what looked like the remains of a human environmental suit. The fabric was torn in places, revealing patches of pale, withered flesh beneath. Its helmet, cracked and clouded, obscured its face, but behind the broken visor, two faint points of light glowed where eyes should have been. Zyron's mouth went dry. Liar VA took a step back. Impossible, he whispered. Humans are extinct. The figure tilted its head, as if studying them in return. Then, in a voice that crackled with age and distortion, it spoke. Not yet. Oren sucked in a sharp breath. That's not a recording. The figure took a slow step forward, boots scraping against the dust-covered floor. The motion sent a ripple through the room, lights flickering, machinery buzzing weakly to life, the very air seeming to thrum with some unseen force. Zyron clenched his jaw. What are you? For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, the figure raised a gloved hand, pointing past them, toward the hallway they had come from. Not safe, it rasped. It wakes. A deep, metallic groan shuddered through the facility, reverberating off the walls like a distant earthquake. Liar VA's scanner flared suddenly, the display flooding with energy readings that hadn't existed moments ago. Oren paled. Something's activating. Zyron turned sharply, looking past the open doors. The corridor behind them, once empty, now felt suffocatingly small, as if the shadows themselves had thickened. The temperature had dropped. The air smelled wrong. And then, in the distance, came the sound of something massive shifting. The figure before them staggered, its legs nearly giving out. Whatever strength it had was failing. But it still pointed behind them, more urgently this time. "Run." The words barely left its mouth before the facility shuddered again. The overhead lights flickered wildly, casting erratic bursts of illumination. And in one of those flashes, Zyron saw it, just for a split second. A shape. Not human. Not like the figure before them. Something large. Something that shouldn't move the way it did. The lights cut out again. And then, from the darkness, a sound. A rasping breath. A dragging step. A deep, unnatural click, like metal grinding against bone. Oren didn't hesitate. "Move!" The Zelvari turned and ran. Zyron stayed just long enough to see the suited figure stumble toward the nearest console, hands flying across the cracked interface as if desperately trying to override something. Then the chamber doors slammed shut, sealing the figure inside. And Zyron had no choice but to follow the others into the unknown. The halls of the facility were no longer still. The deeper they ran, the more the structure came alive, lights bursting to life in rapid, flickering sequences, panels hissing as if expelling ancient air, distant alarms warbling weakly as though struggling to remember their purpose. Zyron risked a glance over his shoulder. Something was following them. He couldn't see it clearly, but the glimpses he caught in the erratic flashes of light were enough. It was massive. Twisted. It moved in unnatural bursts, shifting in ways that made no sense. Sometimes it was on 2 legs, sometimes on 4, sometimes it seemed to drag itself forward like a puppet with its strings tangled. And it was fast. Liar VA nearly tripped as they rounded a corner, his breath ragged. "What is that?" Oren grabbed his arm, yanking him forward. "Keep moving." Zyron's mind raced. The figure in the suit, the human, or whatever was left of one, hadn't been afraid of them. It had only feared whatever was chasing them now. And that meant they were running towards something just as dangerous. A heavy blast door loomed ahead, partially open. The room beyond was vast, filled with rows of glass containment chambers. Some were shattered. Some were empty. And some still held things inside. Liar VA hesitated. "This doesn't look any safer." A guttural, grinding noise echoed from the hallway behind them. Oren didn't hesitate. He shoved Liar VA forward and bolted through the open door. Zyron followed, slamming his hand against the control panel. Sparks flew as the door fought against its failing mechanisms, groaning as it struggled to seal shut. And just as it finally closed, just as the locks engaged, something hit the other side. Hard. The impact sent a deep boom through the room, rattling the glass chambers. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. The door dented inward, not enough to break, but enough to show the sheer force behind whatever was trying to get through. Zyron stepped back, his breathing heavy. Oren turned to face the chamber. His voice was tight. "We need another way out." Liar VA's gaze was fixed on the containment units, his expression unreadable. "We need to know what this place was." Zyron exhaled. He already knew the answer. He had known from the moment he saw that phrase on the monitor. Project Revenant. This wasn't just a research facility. This was something else. Something worse. And whatever was left behind wasn't supposed to be found. The silence that followed was worse than the pounding against the door. It wasn't the absence of sound but the feeling that something was waiting, listening. Zyron could hear his own pulse hammering in his ears as he slowly stepped away from the damaged door. The air inside the chamber was thick with dust, and the dim emergency lighting flickered unevenly, casting long, shifting shadows against the containment units. Liar VA was still staring at the glass enclosures, his eyes darting from one to the next. Some were empty, their interiors lined with deep scratches, evidence of whatever had once been locked inside. Others held remains, twisted bones, torn fabric, dark stains long dried into the metal floors beneath them. But a few still contained things that had not yet decayed. Bodies suspended in thick, yellowed fluid, their features distorted and barely recognizable. Oren's voice was a hushed whisper. These were humans. Xiron didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was undeniable. The structures of the skeletal remains, the faint traces of once living tissue, they matched the records of the extinct species. But the question remained, why had they been here? What had been done to them? The control panel on the side of one of the larger containment units suddenly flickered to life. A series of red warnings scrolled across the cracked display, the human language barely legible. L'Hervier moved closer, wiping dust from the screen. His fingers trembled slightly as he attempted to decipher the words. Experiment logs, he murmured. But these are recent. Xiron's stomach twisted. That wasn't possible. The human species had been extinct for centuries. There was no way these logs should have activity after their extinction. And yet, as L'Hervier scrolled, the latest entry flashed before them, dated only weeks ago. Oren cursed under his breath. That doesn't make sense. There haven't been humans in this sector for hundreds of years. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers overhead, so sudden and jarring that all three of them froze. The sound was garbled, layered with static, but words pushed through the interference. Facility compromised. Sequence failed. They are waking. Xiron's blood ran cold. The voice didn't sound like a warning from the past. It sounded current. The lights above them flickered violently. A deep groan echoed from somewhere beyond the chamber, metal shifting under unseen pressure. Then came the sound of something moving, slow, deliberate steps that carried weight, pressing against the grated flooring. L'Hervier stepped back from the control panel, his breath shallow. That's coming from inside. Oren grabbed his wrist, forcing him toward the other side of the room. We need to find another way out. Now. Xiron's mind raced as he followed. There was no telling how many containment units still held something alive. If this facility had been active recently, that meant there was more to Project Revenant than they had assumed. The experiment hadn't just been about preserving humans, it had been about changing them. Another sound cut through the thick air. This time, it wasn't mechanical. It was breathing. A slow, uneven inhale, followed by a rattling exhale. And then another. And another. The three of them froze, barely daring to move. The containment units lining the far wall cast warped reflections of their figures, but Xiron saw something else. A shape that wasn't theirs. Something had stepped out from the shadows. It was humanoid in shape but wrong in every way. Its limbs were too long, its head slightly tilted as if its neck couldn't fully support it. Its skin was stretched too tight, its surface marked with deep scars that shimmered unnaturally in the flickering light. But the worst part was its eyes. Hollow, sunken voids that pulsed with faint, eerie illumination, just like the figure they had encountered before. But this one wasn't weakened. This one was strong. And it was watching them. Xiron felt his breath hitch. The figure in the environmental suit had tried to warn them. It wakes. Now he understood. Oren was the first to react, grabbing a rusted metal rod from a nearby workstation and stepping back cautiously. L'Hervier reached for his scanner, but Xiron knew it was useless now. They didn't need readings to confirm what was happening. The thing moved. It didn't charge at them like an animal, it advanced with slow, deliberate steps, as if testing their reactions. Its head twitched slightly, its mouth barely parting, and a low, guttural noise seeped from its throat. And then the containment unit alarms blared. More red lights flared across the room. The airlocks hissed, vents screeched open, and the security overrides failed in rapid succession. Glass began to crack, first one enclosure, then another. They weren't dealing with just one of these things. The entire facility was waking up. Oren didn't wait. He turned and bolted toward the far exit, dragging Liar-VA with him. Xiron followed, his pulse hammering. The sound of shattering glass erupted behind them, followed by inhuman shrieks that sent chills down his spine. Something slammed against the floor, a body hitting metal with heavy force. Then another. And another. They were being hunted. Xiron reached the door just as Oren struggled to get it open. The ancient mechanism groaned, gears grinding against years of decay. Liar-VA pounded on the control panel, but the system refused to cooperate. Behind them, the creatures advanced. Xiron could feel them drawing closer, their movement unnatural, their breathing sharp and erratic. He turned his head for only a split second, and it was a mistake. One of them was already there. A gaunt, skeletal hand shot forward, fingers stretching unnaturally long, reaching for him. Xiron barely ducked in time as it swiped at his head, its nails slicing through the air where he had been just moments before. Oren roared in frustration and slammed his entire weight against the door. It jolted, then finally gave way, creaking open just enough for them to squeeze through. Liar-VA stumbled first, followed by Oren. Xiron was last, his foot barely cleared the threshold before he felt something pull at his leg. The creature's grip was ice cold. For a heart-stopping moment, it had him. Its fingers wrapped around his boot, yanking him back toward the darkness. The glow of its hollow eyes bore into him, its mouth twisting into something that might have once been a smile. Then Oren lunged back and struck its arm with the metal rod. The impact made the creature screech, a sound that vibrated through Xiron's bones. The grip loosened, just enough for him to kick free. He tumbled forward, rolling into the next corridor as Liar-VA slammed his hand against the emergency close button. The door groaned. The metal locks engaged. The last thing Xiron saw was the creature's face staring back at him through the narrowing gap, its hollow gaze unblinking. And then the door sealed shut. Xiron lay on the cold floor, panting. Liar-VA was shaking. Oren's grip on the rod was white-knuckled. But the silence didn't last. Because in the distance, past the next set of hallways, more alarms were triggering. More locks were failing. And beyond those doors, something bigger was waking up. Oren was the first to push himself upright, his breath still ragged. Xiron could see his hands shaking slightly, though he clenched them into fists to hide it. Liar-VA leaned against the cold metal wall, his normally composed expression shattered by sheer disbelief. The door behind them remained shut, but the muffled sounds on the other side told them the creatures were still there, waiting, pacing. Then came the distant clang of more security doors failing. The echoes rippled through the corridors, growing louder with each passing second. Whatever was waking up wasn't just behind them, it was ahead, too. "We're trapped," Liar-VA whispered, his voice barely audible over the warning sirens blaring through the facility. "There's no way out." Xiron scanned the corridor, trying to think past the fear clawing at his mind. The structure was old, its technology barely functioning, but somewhere within these ruins had to be an override, a way to either contain whatever had been unleashed or, at the very least, clear a path to escape. Oren wiped sweat from his brow. If the humans built this place to conduct experiments, there has to be a central control hub. A command center. He looked at Liar-VA. "Can you access the main systems?" Liar-VA hesitated. "If the terminals are still online, maybe. But even if I do, what exactly are we trying to do? Lock the creatures in again? Restart the containment fields? We don't even know how many there are or how much of this place is compromised." Xiron exhaled sharply. "We need information first. If we just run blindly, we'll end up in a worse situation." He turned toward the corridor stretching ahead of them, its flickering lights barely illuminating the path forward. The command center would be somewhere deeper inside, closer to the core systems. Oren let out a humorless laugh. "Deeper inside. Great. That's exactly where I don't want to go." Despite the protest, he took the lead, gripping the rusted metal rod like a weapon as they moved cautiously through the hallway. The further they went, the more the walls showed signs of damage, deep gouges in the metal, scorch marks from energy weapons long since burned out, and dried streaks of something that looked unsettlingly like old blood. Then they saw it. A security checkpoint, its reinforced doors hanging open, half crushed as if something had forced its way through. The terminal on the nearby wall flickered weakly, struggling to stay powered. HFY rushed to it, his fingers flying across the interface, working against the decaying system to pull up anything useful. Xiron stood watch, his nerves on edge. He swore he could hear something moving in the vents above them, the faintest scraping sound echoing through the empty space. HFY cursed. Most of the data is corrupted, but I found a file. A final security alert. He hesitated, then played the distorted audio log. A human voice crackled to life, frantic and barely comprehensible beneath layers of static. They're not dying. We shut down the project, but it's too late. The mutations. They adapt. Regrow. Every time we think they're contained, the voice cut off with a choked gasp, then a desperate whisper. If anyone finds this, you have to burn it. The whole facility. No survivors. No recovery. Just burn it. Silence followed. Xiron felt his stomach drop. The humans had tried to end this. They had failed. Oren swore under his breath. That doesn't sound like a containment issue. That sounds like an extinction-level mistake. HFY turned back to the terminal. There's a self-destruct mechanism built into the facility, but it's locked behind clearance codes we don't have. Xiron clenched his jaw. Then we find another way. Before HFY could respond, a sharp metallic bang echoed from behind them. Something heavy had just dropped into the corridor they had come from. Then came the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps. Oren gripped his weapon. We need to move. They sprinted down the next hallway, but just as they turned the corner, the facility itself betrayed them. The lights overhead flickered violently, then surged with a sickly red glow as an automated voice blared overhead. Security override activated. Perimeter lockdown in progress. Doors began slamming shut all around them, cutting off exits, sealing pathways. The ancient systems, barely functioning moments ago, were suddenly alive, and it wasn't random. Someone was controlling it. Xiron skidded to a halt. That's not an automated failsafe. Something is doing this. HFY's breath was shallow. Not something. He pointed at a nearby screen, its interface glitching but displaying a figure moving through the system logs. A humanoid outline, distorted by static. Someone. The realization struck like a bolt of lightning. The facility wasn't just full of creatures. There was still a human here. A survivor. Oren didn't hesitate. Then we find them. They turned toward the only corridor still open, running headlong into the unknown. The corridor stretched ahead of them, the flickering red lights making the shadows dance along the walls. Xiron, Oren, and HFY pushed forward, their breath ragged, their footsteps echoing through the metal halls. The facility was alive now, pulsing, shifting, reacting. The doors had closed behind them, locking them onto a path they had no control over. And at the end of that path, somewhere in the heart of this ruined place, was the last human. The screen's distorted image had shown only a vague outline, but that was enough. The humans were supposed to be long gone, wiped away by their own catastrophic failure. But if one had survived, if someone had been living here, controlling the security systems, then they knew more about what had happened than any file or recording ever could. A loud hum vibrated through the air as they neared the next chamber. The walls trembled as something massive powered up, a deep mechanical groan that sounded like a machine waking from centuries of sleep. The door in front of them hissed open, revealing a control room bathed in dim, flickering light. And standing in the center of it was a figure. A human. They were tall, clad in what remained of a tattered lab coat, their skin pale from years without proper sunlight. Their hair was disheveled, their face gaunt, but their eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, burned with something almost inhuman. A mixture of madness and clarity, of desperation and resolve. You weren't supposed to come here, the human said, their voice hoarse, as if they hadn't spoken aloud in years. Xiron took a cautious step forward. You're alive. The human let out a dry, bitter laugh. Alive? No. I stopped being alive the day the others sealed this place. The day they decided to burn it all and leave me behind. They tilted their head. But you've ruined everything. Oren's grip on his makeshift weapon tightened. We're trying to stop whatever is down here from getting out. We saw the logs. We know this place was meant to be destroyed. The human's eyes darkened. And you think you understand what's happening? You think you know what they created? Their fingers moved across a control panel, and suddenly, the monitors around the room flickered to life. Each screen displayed something different, images of dark, shifting masses moving through the ruined halls, creatures that didn't belong to any known biology, things that slithered through vents and reformed after being torn apart. They weren't just experiments, the human continued. They were evolutions. The perfect lifeforms, designed to survive anything. The scientists thought they could control them, but they underestimated them. Just like you have. Lyre-VA's voice was tight with fear. If they can't be killed, how did you survive all this time? The human smiled, but it wasn't reassuring. I learned. I adapted. I became invisible to them. They spread their arms, gesturing to the room. This facility isn't just a prison. It's their breeding ground. They don't want to leave. They're waiting for the right conditions to spread, to take what's left of the outside world. Xiron's stomach twisted. Then we have to finish what the humans started. We have to destroy it. The humans shook their head. That's what they thought, too. And when they activated the self-destruct sequence, the creatures learned. They absorbed the energy, made it their own. They don't just survive destruction. They thrive on it. Oren swore under his breath. So what? We just accept that there's no way out? The human's gaze flickered to the screens, then back to them. There's one way. The control panel in front of them lit up, revealing a command prompt. A sequence was already typed in, waiting for one final confirmation. They can't be killed, the human said. But they can be starved. Xiron's mind raced. The facility was old, but it still had power, still had systems running deep underground. If they shut it all down, all of it, maybe the creatures wouldn't have the energy they needed to survive. But there was something else, something the human wasn't saying. Lyre-VA realized it first. You're part of the system now, aren't you? The human's smile faltered. I had to become what they couldn't detect. The facility recognizes me as one of them. If the system dies, so do you, Xiron finished, his voice quiet. The human exhaled slowly. I made my choice a long time ago. You still have time to make yours. They looked at the control panel. The sequence is set. Once it starts, there's no reversing it. Every system will shut down. Every door will seal. Nothing will get out. Their eyes met Xiron's. Not even you. A tense silence filled the room. The sounds of the creatures moving in the distance were growing louder, sensing something was changing. Oren shifted uncomfortably. There's got to be another way. There isn't, the human said. Lyre-VA's hands clenched into fists. Then why not do it yourself? The human hesitated, for just a fraction of a second. Then they laughed softly. Because I wanted to see if you'd have the courage to do what the others couldn't. Xiron looked at the screen. The button flickered. Waiting. He took a deep breath. And pressed it. The facility groaned as its systems began shutting down. The lights flickered, dimmed, then went out entirely. A deep hum resonated through the structure as the generators powered down, one by one. The human exhaled, stepping back into the darkness. Good luck out there. Then, just as the last backup light flickered out, a voice whispered through the blackness. You should run. And then the creatures screamed. Darkness swallowed everything. For a moment, there was no sound, no movement, just an overwhelming, suffocating silence. Then the first scream ripped through the air, high-pitched and unnatural, followed by the pounding of something massive moving through the corridors. The creatures knew. They could feel the life draining from the facility, the energy they had relied on fading. They were panicking. Zyron didn't wait. He grabbed Oren's arm, yanking him toward the exit. L'IRVA was already moving, his breathing sharp and fast in the pitch-black halls. The emergency power was gone, there would be no more doors opening, no more guidance from the facility's systems. They had to navigate by memory, by instinct. Somewhere behind them, the human remained in the control room, silent. They had made their choice. They had accepted their fate. And Zyron knew there was no time to stop, no time to say anything. The last survivor of this ruin had done their part. Now, it was up to them to escape. The halls felt longer, stretching endlessly in the dark. The creatures were everywhere now, their shrieks bouncing off the walls, making it impossible to tell where they were coming from. Some scuttled through the vents above, others clawed at the walls, their bodies shifting, adapting, searching. A sudden movement ahead made Oren stop short, nearly colliding with Zyron. Something stood in the hallway in front of them, a tall, shifting figure barely visible in the faint red glow of a dying emergency light. It didn't attack. It only stood there, its head tilting slightly as if trying to understand them. Then, as if realizing the power it had relied on was truly gone, the creature let out a piercing wail and turned, vanishing into the vents. "They're running," l'IRVA gasped. "They know they can't survive." Zyron didn't let himself feel relief just yet. "That means we're out of time." They pushed forward, racing down the corridors. The walls groaned around them, the ancient structure beginning to collapse without the systems holding it together. Pieces of metal fell from above, sparks showering the floor. The facility was dying. The exit was close. Zyron could feel it. The air was growing colder, fresher, there was an opening ahead. And then, finally, they saw it. The massive entrance, the same one they had arrogantly walked through earlier, now half sealed by a collapsing support beam. The outside world was just beyond it, dim and clouded with dust, but there. Oren wasted no time. He threw his weight against the debris, pushing, gritting his teeth as he tried to force the gap wider. L'IRVA did the same, and together, they created just enough space to slip through. Zyron turned, glancing back one last time. The halls behind them were empty now, but he could still hear the distant howls of the creatures, echoing through the ruins. They were fading, growing weaker. Soon, they would be gone. He stepped through the gap, and the moment he did, the last of the facility's structure gave in. The ground trembled, dust and debris crashing down as the entrance fully caved in behind them. The underground ruin, along with everything inside, was sealed. For a long time, none of them spoke. They stood in the vast, barren landscape, the ruins of the human outpost stretching around them, silent once more. The wind howled softly, carrying away the last echoes of what had happened below. Oren exhaled shakily. "We made it." L'IRVA sat down on a broken piece of metal, running a hand through his hair. "Barely." Zyron looked back at the sealed entrance, his chest heavy with the weight of everything they had just witnessed. The arrogance they had started with was gone now, replaced with something else, respect, maybe. A deeper understanding of the past they had mocked. "The humans knew what they were doing," he said quietly. "They tried to stop this. They tried to warn anyone who came after them." He looked at Oren and l'IRVA. "And we didn't listen." Oren let out a weak chuckle. "I don't think I'll be laughing at human ruins anymore." L'IRVA nodded slowly. "We should tell the others. Make sure no one else ever comes back here." Zyron agreed. But as he looked at the ruined ground beneath them, at the lifeless structures that had once been full of human ambition, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The creatures were gone, the facility was sealed, but the past had left its mark. The arrogance of their kind, the belief that they could walk among ancient ruins and scoff at the failures of those before them, had nearly been their undoing. Zyron turned away from the ruins, his mind quiet. There were lessons here, buried beneath the wreckage of human mistakes and sacrifice. And for the first time, he was willing to learn.